They are not arriving. They are already here. That sentence alone would be enough to destroy careers, erase files, and trigger emergency protocols that officially do not exist, because it contradicts the story you were given, the comfortable one, the version where humanity still believes it has time. The object now labeled 3I Atlas was introduced to the public as a mystery, an interstellar visitor, a rare cosmic wanderer passing through our neighborhood by chance. That explanation lasted just long enough to feel safe. But nothing about 3I Atlas follows the rules of nature. Asteroids do not decelerate. Comets do not change direction. Rocks in space do not possess perfect symmetry. And yet Atlas did all three. When it first appeared at the edge of detection, its trajectory suggested a hyperbolic path, something that should have passed through the solar system once and never returned. But then the numbers stopped behaving. Velocity readings fluctuated without any corresponding force. Course vectors adjusted in deep space, far beyond the influence of any planet, star, or gravitational anomaly. There was no explosion, no outgassing, no debris trail, just correction. Telescopes searching for thermal emissions found nothing. Infrared sensors saw a void where heat should have been, as if the object was actively suppressing its presence. Radiation levels were flat. Magnetic readings were inconsistent. Instruments disagreed with one another in ways that suggested not malfunction, but interference. The shape was worse. High-resolution imaging revealed a structure that was elongated, colossal, and disturbingly uniform. Layered surfaces folded into one another with mathematical precision. Repeating geometric patterns stretched across its surface, not decorative, not random, functional, artificial. Exactly as shown in simulations that were never released. Exactly as shown in classified visual reconstructions, buried beneath defense budgets and redacted briefings. This was not erosion. This was not coincidence. This was design. Scaled estimates, quietly circulated in closed-door meetings, suggested dimensions that should not be possible. Larger than planets, larger than orbital systems, larger than anything humanity has ever built or even imagined building. The reason it appears smaller is not because it is, but because our instruments cannot perceive it in full. Parts of it exist where we cannot measure. 3I Atlas is not an object. It is a vessel. And the most disturbing truth is this: none of this surprised the people in charge. Before the public ever heard the name Atlas, emergency task forces had already been assembled. Before journalists asked questions, answers had already been rehearsed. And before astronomers were allowed to publish their concerns, entire sections of their data were quietly removed. Because this was not first contact. This was confirmation. Decades earlier, long before social media and civilian satellites, humanity made a decision it never voted on. During an era obsessed with dominance, with winning wars before they started, certain governments believed that the universe was empty. They were wrong. The first signals were not accidental. They were not naive attempts at communication. They were deliberate transmissions, sent deep into space with precision and intent. Encoded gravitational maps of Earth's location. Detailed breakdowns of our atmospheric composition. Spectral signatures of liquid water. And most importantly, biology. Human DNA markers. Population data. Neural activity patterns. We didn't just announce where we were. We advertised what we are. They did not discover Earth. We showed them. At the time, it was framed as curiosity, scientific ambition, the noble desire to know if we were alone, but buried in classified addendums and contingency frameworks was another motive entirely. Bargaining. Some within the highest levels of power believed that if something was listening, truly listening, it could be reasoned with, traded with, managed. Technology in exchange for access, energy in exchange for silence, superiority in exchange for compliance. What they failed to understand is that intelligence on that scale does not negotiate. It evaluates. The beings behind Atlas are not explorers in any human sense. They do not seek new homes. They do not build civilizations across planets. They do not spread culture, language, or ideology. They consume. In fragmented translations and heavily censored reports, they are referred to as the Atlasians, not because that is their name, but because our analysts needed something to call them. A label, a mythological placeholder for something far older than language. The Atlasians do not live on planets. They inhabit structures. Colossal, mobile constructs like 3i Atlas, capable of traveling between stars that have already died. They do not colonize worlds, they process them, harvesting complexity, extracting biological value, and erasing what remains. They do not build cities. They do not form alliances. They do not sign treaties. They observe. They analyze. They eliminate. Descriptions of them are inconsistent, which may be the most honest detail of all. They are rarely seen directly. Most encounters are indirect shadows that do not match their source, distortions in electromagnetic fields, gaps in memory that leave behind a sense of being watched. On the few occasions when something was seen clearly, witnesses described a form that was almost familiar. A humanoid silhouette, entirely technological, smooth and seamless, with no visible face. Not because it needs one, but because we expect it. A deliberate echo. Their presence is not loud. It does not announce itself. It interferes. Systems fail. Instruments behave incorrectly. People feel watched without knowing why. Reality itself seems to hesitate around them. And now, 3i Atlas is close enough to begin the next phase. What comes next will not look like an invasion. There will be no ships in the sky, no cities burning, no sudden extinction event that forces humanity to unite at the last second. Because the Atlasians do not invade. They disconnect. To understand what is coming, you have to abandon the idea that intelligence must resemble us. The Atlasians are not creatures in the way we define life. They do not evolve through survival of the fittest. They do not reproduce biologically. They do not age. They do not die in any way we can observe. They persist. Their existence is distributed across structures, systems, and processes that function as a single organism. What we call 3i Atlas is not merely a ship. It is a habitat, a mind, and a mechanism of execution, all fused into one. They do not live on planets because planets are inefficient, fixed, fragile, temporary. Instead, they inhabit colossal mobile constructs, drifting between stars that have already burned themselves out, dead systems. Cold regions of the galaxy where no one is watching, where no signals are broadcast, where time itself feels slower. There they wait. The Atlasians do not build cities because they have no need for permanence. They do not decorate. They do not preserve history. Memory, for them, is not recorded, it is embedded. Every structure they inhabit carries the accumulated data of countless consumed worlds. They do not communicate verbally. Sound is crude. Language is inefficient. Symbols are limiting. They exchange information through interference, through modulation of fields we barely understand. When they observe, they do not look. They sample, they penetrate, they map systems from the inside out. This is why encounters with them are never clear. People do not see Atlasians. They experience them. A sudden pressure behind the eyes. A distortion in depth perception. A sense that time has skipped or folded. Electronics failing in precise, repeatable ways, and sometimes, rarely, a shadow where none should exist. When visibility does occur, it is almost always indirect, reflections that move independently, figures at the edge of vision that vanish when focused on, surveillance footage that records silhouettes no one remembers seeing in real time. On the few confirmed occasions where a form was observed clearly, witnesses described something unsettlingly deliberate. A humanoid outline, proportions close to human, but wrong in subtle ways. No visible joints, no face. Not because they need to look like us, but because we need to recognize something. A psychological anchor. Analysts believe this form is not their true shape. It is an interface, a projection designed to minimize cognitive collapse during observation. Even so, those who witnessed it directly reported long-term effects. Insomnia, loss of emotional range, a persistent feeling of being evaluated, as if something had looked inside them and decided to leave them running. The first confirmed contact did not happen recently. It did not happen after the discovery of 3I Atlas. It happened decades ago. Buried beneath layers of classification, the earliest interaction occurred not through a meeting, but through a response. After the first deep space signals were transmitted, something answered, not with words, not with images, but with data that should not have been possible. Technological concepts humanity had not yet developed. Energy principles that violated known conservation laws. Mathematical frameworks that did not resolve, they converged. At first, scientists believed they had made a breakthrough on their own, a sudden leap, a coincidence of genius, but patterns emerged, too consistent, too aligned with the structure of the original signals. Something was guiding. They were not teaching. They were testing. The information provided was never complete, always just enough to advance understanding without revealing intent, just enough to encourage dependency, just enough to ensure humanity would keep transmitting, refining, reaching further into the dark. And the governments involved knew exactly what they were doing. They believed that control came from leverage, that possession of advanced technology meant power, that anything capable of interstellar travel would value negotiation. They were catastrophically wrong. Because the Atlasians do not perceive individuals, they do not perceive governments, they do not perceive nations. They perceive systems. Civilizations are treated as biological processes, variables to be measured, patterns to be modeled, outcomes to be predicted. From their perspective, humanity is not unique. It is familiar. Earth is one of many worlds that reached this stage, broadcasting its presence, developing technology faster than wisdom, believing itself alone until it was. The reason Earth has not already been erased is not morality. It is usefulness. The Atlasians study diversity the way we study ecosystems in a lab. Genetic variation, behavioral unpredictability, adaptive resilience, our ability to survive in hostile conditions, to rebuild after collapse, to persist through failure. We are interesting. For now, 3I Atlas is not approaching Earth to conquer it. It is arriving to decide whether this experiment continues. And this is where the silence becomes terrifying. There are no warnings, no demands, no ultimatums, because the Atlasians do not announce conclusions. They implement them. And somewhere deep inside government archives, sealed rooms and black-budget facilities, there are people who already know what that conclusion is likely to be. Because they've seen it before. The greatest lie humanity ever told itself was that power comes from control. When the earliest data arrived, fragmented, impossible, years ahead of our science, it did not reach the public. It did not even reach most scientists. It was filtered upward, through intelligence channels, military research divisions, and advisory committees that existed only on paper. Entire branches of government were never informed, because this was never meant to be shared. At first, the interaction was framed as a breakthrough. Exotic energy principles, materials that defied entropy, concepts that hinted at propulsion systems without fuel, computation without heat, structures that repaired themselves at the molecular level. To ambitious minds, this wasn't a warning. It was an opportunity. A small coalition of decision-makers believed they were standing at the edge of history, that whoever mastered this technology first would no longer need to fear rivals, climate collapse, or scarcity. Wars would end not through peace, but through superiority so absolute that resistance would become obsolete. They convinced themselves this was leadership. What they were actually doing was volunteering the planet. The communications were never two-way conversations. They were not dialogues. They were exchanges of access. Each transmission from Earth became more specific, less theoretical, more biological. Gravitational coordinates refined to pinpoint precision. Atmospheric drift patterns over decades. Electromagnetic noise produced by human civilization. And finally, internal data. Biological diversity maps. Genetic bottlenecks. Neural response variability across populations. Every signal painted a clearer picture. The Atlasians never asked questions. They never needed to. The assumption inside these classified programs was simple and fatal, that any intelligence capable of interstellar travel would value stability, cooperation, and mutual benefit, that it would understand treaties, that it would recognize borders, authority, and diplomacy, that it would think like us. Civilizations capable of crossing galaxies do not make agreements. They make assessments. The technology that was shared was never complete. It was modular, compartmentalized. Always just enough to be impressive, never enough to be understood. Entire research teams spent decades trying to replicate systems that were deliberately designed to resist comprehension. Some succeeded partially. Others disappeared. Facilities went dark. Programs were shut down overnight. Accidents occurred that left no debris, no survivors, and no official explanation. Files were sealed not for decades, but indefinitely, classified not for national security, but for psychological containment. Because those closest to the truth began to understand something terrifying. The Atlasians were not responding to requests. They were preparing. Every technological gift came with side effects. Infrastructure became dependent on systems that no longer functioned without exotic components. Energy grids became more efficient and more fragile. Defense systems grew smarter and less controllable. Humanity was being optimized, not for survival, for processing. The internal justification was always the same. Delay, buy time. Learn as much as possible before pulling back, before closing the channel, before severing contact. But the channel was never open in the first place. It was a one-way mirror. By the time dissenting voices began to speak quietly, urgently, it was already too late, because Earth was no longer a hidden variable. It was cataloged. 3I Atlas is not arriving to negotiate terms. Those terms were settled long ago. What approaches now is the physical implementation of a decision made in silence, a structure designed not to conquer, but to execute a process refined across countless worlds. And the people who authorized first contact know this. That is why there are no emergency broadcasts. That is why leaders speak in reassurances instead of preparation. That is why the language has shifted from unknown object to natural anomaly. Panic would be unpredictable. Silence is easier to manage. What the public does not know is that contingency plans were never designed to stop Atlas. They were designed to manage collapse, continuity of command, preservation of data, selective survival. The assumption was never that humanity would win, only that something might remain. And now, as 3i Atlas drifts closer, silent, symmetrical, deliberate, those same decision makers are realizing the final truth. They were never partners. They were the invitation. There will be no fire in the sky, no fleets descending through clouds, no cities erased in flashes of light, no moment humanity can point to and say, "This is when it started." Because the Atlasians do not wage war. They deactivate systems. What 3i Atlas carries is not an army. It is a sequence, a protocol refined across worlds that believed themselves important right up until they stopped functioning. Internal documents never refer to it as an attack. The language is colder, more precise. Planetary sanitization protocol. It begins quietly, not with destruction, but with subtraction. The first target is not population. It is infrastructure. Earth's magnetic field, something most humans never think about, becomes unstable in ways that cannot be explained by solar activity. Poles drift faster than predicted. Weak zones expand. Satellites passing through these regions experience memory corruption, guidance errors, then silence. They do not explode. They shut off. Orbital platforms lose synchronization. GPS accuracy degrades, then becomes unreliable. Communication satellites drift just far enough to be useless. Space debris patterns shift as if nudged by invisible hands. Astrophysicists argue, engineers blame software, officials reassure. No one says the truth out loud. Next comes electricity. Power grids fail not randomly, but selectively. Failures cascade along paths that maximize confusion and minimize repair. Backup systems activate, then collapse under loads they were never meant to carry. Entire regions go dark for minutes, then hours, then days. Technicians find nothing burned, nothing broken. The systems simply refuse to respond. They do not invade. They disconnect. As global networks fragment, the digital world collapses inward. Financial systems lose synchronization. Data centers experience unexplained cooling failures. High-frequency trading algorithms stall mid-execution, leaving markets frozen in half-finished states. Modern civilization, built on timing and trust, begins to stutter. Still no explosions. Still no visible enemy. Only silence. Then comes the atmosphere. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Minute shifts in ionization, subtle changes in upper atmospheric chemistry, variations so small they are dismissed as noise until they are. Ozone thinning in irregular patterns. Radiation exposure creeping upward. Microorganisms behaving differently. Nothing lethal, not yet. This phase is observational. The Atlasians are measuring resilience. They are watching how long life persists when systems fail, how quickly humans adapt without technology, which regions stabilize, which collapse into chaos, which populations cooperate, which fracture. We are not being wiped out. We are being studied under stress. This is why there are no demands, no ultimatums, no messages. The protocol assumes that communication is unnecessary. By the time the subject realizes what is happening, the data is already collected. Somewhere inside 3i Atlas, models are updating in real time. Predictive frameworks recalculating humanity's value, not morally, not ethically, functionally. The most terrifying aspect of the protocol is not what it does. It is what it does not do. There is no attempt to control governments. no effort to manipulate leaders, no interest in negotiation. Those variables were resolved decades ago. What remains is execution. And here is the detail that never reached the public. There is no end phase. The question humanity keeps asking is the wrong one. It is not why are they coming. It is why haven't they finished yet. Earth was never selected for its resources. There are planets richer in metals, moons with purer ice, stars that offer energy on a scale we cannot comprehend. Nothing here is unique in that sense. Life is. Not life as existence, but life as variation. Earth is chaotic, unstable, violent. It produces endless mutations, endless failure, endless adaptation. Species rise, collapse, and re-emerge in altered forms. Intelligence appears, nearly destroys itself, then rebuilds again using the ruins as foundation. From an Atlassian perspective, this planet is not a home. It is a laboratory. Humanity is not being spared. It is being observed under live conditions. Every blackout, every infrastructure failure, every moment where technology falters and societies are forced to adapt. All of it is data. They are measuring how we respond when stripped of the systems we believe define us. How quickly we revert to cooperation or cruelty, whether intelligence persists without dominance, whether consciousness retains value when comfort is removed. This is why we are still alive. Not because we matter, but because the experiment is not finished. 3i Atlas is close enough now to listen without speaking, to observe without interference. Its silence is not absence, it is focus. Inside that structure, models are running that do not deal in hope or fear, only outcomes, probabilities, utility. There is no hatred in the process. There is no malice, only decision. And the most unsettling realization is this. The Atlassians may not even see this as an ending. Civilizations that consume planets do not think in terms of apocalypse. They think in terms of transition, one state to another, one configuration replaced by something more efficient. Extinction is not a tragedy to them. It is optimization. If humanity collapses quietly, Earth will be archived as a completed cycle. A biosphere that reached complexity, produced intelligence, and was resolved. The planet will remain. Life may even return simpler, quieter, less problematic. And if humanity adapts, if we survive the shutdowns, if we rebuild without the systems that made us fragile, if we persist in ways the models did not predict, then Earth becomes something else entirely. Not preserved, integrated. That is the outcome no one wants to say out loud. Because integration does not mean coexistence. It means absorption. The government knows this, or at least those still allowed to know. That is why there is no evacuation plan, no unified response, no declaration of emergency on a planetary scale. There is nothing to fight. There is nothing to stop. The process is already running. 3i Atlas did not arrive to ask permission. It arrived to confirm results. Maybe it is not the beginning. Maybe it is only the first. And maybe the decision has already been made. If the sky goes quiet, that does not mean they have left. No final strike. If Earth is deemed non-viable, the protocol does not escalate. It concludes. Atmospheric sterilization increases incrementally. Magnetic collapse accelerates. Radiation levels rise just enough to prevent complex life from sustaining itself. Oceans remain. Continents remain. The planet survives. Life does not. And if Earth is deemed viable, that outcome is worse. Because viability does not mean preservation. It means integration.